The great hall of Nexus Prime buzzed with voices from 1,000 different worlds. Ambassador Han Wook sat quietly in his chair, watching as representatives from across the galaxy filled their seats. Some floated in bubbles of water, others hung from the ceiling on silk threads, and a few glowed with their own inner light. After 150 years, he still found the diversity beautiful, but today felt different. Today, the air carried tension like electricity before a storm. Han Wook had served as Earth's senior ambassador for 20 years. He had negotiated trade deals, prevented wars, and helped build bridges between species that had never trusted each other. His gray hair and lined face showed the weight of those years, but his eyes remained sharp and alert. Captain Lee Nari stood behind him, her military uniform crisp and clean. She commanded the human fleet stationed around Nexus Prime, 12 ships, that helped keep the peace in this sector of space. Her hand rested casually on her weapon, a habit from years of service. Dr. Park Taman sat nearby, reviewing data on his tablet. As the chief cultural expert, he understood alien species better than almost any human. His young face looked worried as he scanned through the reports that had been flooding in for weeks. High Counselor Vextar called the session to order. The tall, blue-skinned Altarian's voice echoed through the chamber. "Today we vote on Resolution 2387X, he announced. The restriction of human technological advancement and military expansion. Han Wook felt his stomach tighten. They had known this was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. The human species has grown too powerful, Vextar continued. Their technology advances faster than we can understand. Their military grows stronger each year. Many of our member species fear what humans might become. Around the hall, alien heads nodded in agreement. Some whispered to their neighbors. Others stared directly at the human delegation with suspicious eyes. Dr. Park leaned forward. "This is madness," he whispered. "We've done nothing but help them." Han Wook raised his hand to speak. The chamber fell silent. "Honored members," he began, his voice calm and steady. "Humanity has served this council faithfully for 150 years. We have shared our technology freely. We have protected your trade routes. We have died defending your colonies from pirates and invaders. What have we done to deserve this fear?" A representative from the Zentoran Empire stood up. "You grow too fast," he growled. "Your ships become more powerful each year. Your colonies spread across more systems. How long before you decide you no longer need the Council?" "We have never threatened any member species," Captain Lee said, stepping forward. "Our fleet exists to protect, not to conquer." "That's what you say now," replied a delegate from Bellatrix. "But power corrupts. We have seen it happen before." Han Wook looked around the chamber. These were beings he had worked with for decades. He had shared meals with some of them, celebrated their children's achievements, mourned their losses. Now, they looked at him like he was a predator waiting to strike. "We propose the following restrictions," Vextar announced. "First, humans must share all military technology with the Council. Second, human fleet expansion must be limited to current levels. Third, human colonies must submit to Council oversight. Fourth, all human military actions must be approved by this body." The chamber erupted in discussion. Some species cheered the proposal. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Dr. Park stood up. "You're asking us to give up our independence," he said. "You're asking us to become children under your control. We're asking you to be responsible members of this community," Vextar replied coldly. Han Wook closed his eyes for a moment. He thought about Earth, beautiful and blue in the darkness of space. He thought about the human colonies scattered across the galaxy, millions of people who had built new lives among the stars. He thought about the young soldiers like Captain Lee, who had sworn to protect innocent lives regardless of what species they belonged to. When he opened his eyes, his decision was clear. "We request a brief recess to discuss this proposal," he said. Vextar nodded. "Granted. 30 minutes." The human delegation gathered in a small side chamber. Captain Lee paced back and forth, her face red with anger. Dr. Park sat slumped in, his chair staring at the floor. "They're afraid of us," Han Wook said quietly. "Not because of what we've done, but because of what they think we might do." "So we give up everything we've built?" Lee asked. "We let them control our lives, or we leave," Park said softly. The room fell silent. It was the option they had all been thinking about but hadn't wanted to say out loud. "If we stay and accept these restrictions, we become prisoners," Han Wook said. "If we fight the restrictions, we prove their point about human aggression. But if we leave, we lose everything we've worked for here," Lee finished. Han Wook nodded. "But we keep our freedom. And maybe someday, they'll understand what they've lost." They returned to the Great Hall. The vote was swift and decisive. 847 votes in favor of the restrictions, 1 vote against. Only the humans. Han Wook stood slowly. The chamber watched him in silence. Some faces showed triumph, others uncertainty. A few looked genuinely sad. "We came to this galaxy in peace," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space. "We offered friendship, knowledge, and protection. We asked for nothing but the chance to grow alongside you as equals." He paused, looking around at faces he had known for years. "We leave in peace. We will not return." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. No one moved. No one spoke. Captain Lee activated her communicator. "All human ships, all human personnel, all human citizens in council space. Code Omega, immediate evacuation, 72 hours. Within minutes, human ships across the galaxy began moving. Families packed their belongings. Soldiers powered down defense stations they had maintained for decades. Diplomats closed embassies that had operated for generations. The humans said nothing more to the council. They simply left. 72 hours later, the last human ship crossed the galactic rim and vanished into the darkness beyond. They took, with them, their technology, their protection, and their friendship. The council had gotten what it wanted. The humans were gone. But as the days passed and the first reports of problems began arriving, some members wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. 6 months had passed since the humans disappeared beyond the galactic rim. High Counselor Vextar sat in his private office on Nexus Prime, staring at reports that made his stomach churn. The holographic displays showed red warning lights across dozens of star systems. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades were collapsing. Without human cargo ships and their advanced navigation systems, many smaller species couldn't transport goods between distant worlds. The Bellatrixians, who had always relied on human logistics networks, were facing food shortages on their outer colonies. Trade Minister Cole Wynn entered the office without being announced, his forearms gesturing wildly. His species normally maintained perfect composure, but today he looked frantic. "The Meridian route has completely shut down," he announced. "The Aquarians can't navigate through the asteroid fields without human sensor technology. 3 cargo ships have been destroyed this week alone." Vextar didn't look up from his reports. "They'll learn to adapt. All species did before humans arrived." "Before humans arrived, interstellar trade was limited to nearby systems," Colwyn replied sharply. "The humans connected the galaxy. Without them, we're becoming isolated islands again." A communication alert buzzed on Vextar's desk. General Morgeth appeared as a hologram, his reptilian features tense with worry. "High Counselor, we have a situation in the outer reaches. Pirates have attacked the crystalline colonies. They destroyed 2 mining stations and captured over 10,000 civilians." Vextar finally looked up. "Send the patrol fleet to deal with them." "The patrol fleet was destroyed yesterday," Morgeth said grimly. "The pirates have human weapons. Our ships can't match their firepower." "How do pirates have human weapons?" Vextar demanded. "They must have scavenged them from abandoned human bases," the general replied. "Or maybe some humans stayed behind and turned to crime. We don't know." Vexitar felt a chill run down his spine. The humans had always patrolled the dangerous regions of space, keeping pirates and raiders under control. Their fast ships and superior weapons had made most criminals think twice before attacking innocent colonies. "Prepare the reserve fleet," he ordered. "High Counselor," Morgeth said quietly, "the reserve fleet is already deployed. We lost 12 ships last week to attacks in 4 different sectors. We don't have enough vessels to protect all our member worlds." After the general's image faded, Vextar and Colwyn sat in uncomfortable silence. Through the office window, they could see the great docking bays of Nexus Prime. Many of them stood empty now. Human ships had once filled those spaces, their crews coming and going on missions to protect Council interests across the galaxy. "It's not just the military problems," Colwyn said eventually. "The power grids on 17 worlds are starting to fail. The humans designed most of our modern infrastructure. Without their engineers and technicians, we can't maintain the systems." Vexitar's personal communicator chimed with an urgent message. He read it twice before the words sank in. "The hegemony has crossed our border," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The hegemony was everything the Council feared humans might become. A militant empire that conquered other species and enslaved entire worlds. For decades, the Council had avoided war with them only because human fleets patrolled the border regions. The hegemony's leaders knew that attacking Council worlds meant facing human retaliation, but the humans were gone now. Colwyn's 4 hands clenched into fists. "How many ships?" "Over 300, Vextar replied. "They've already occupied 4 systems in the neutral zone. Our border post didn't even try to resist." The office door opened again. Elder Zixara glided in, her crystalline body shimmering with inner light. She was one of the oldest beings in the Council, having served for over 5 centuries. She had been one of only 12 members to vote against the human restrictions. "I warned you this would happen," she said, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "The humans were not our masters. They were our guardians." Vextar stood up, his tall frame towering over the ancient being. They were growing too powerful. Their technology was advancing too quickly. If we hadn't stopped them, they would have dominated us all. "And now the hegemony will dominate us instead," Zixara replied calmly. "At least the humans asked nothing from us but friendship. The hegemony will take everything." Reports continued flooding in throughout the day. The Zentauran colonies were under attack. The Aquarian trade convoys had stopped running entirely. 3 minor species had formally withdrawn from the Council, declaring they would seek their own protection agreements. By evening, Vextar's office was crowded with desperate representatives. The Bellatrixian ambassador was crying, her species' way of showing extreme distress. The Zentauran general had traveled here personally to demand military support that didn't exist. "We need to contact the humans," someone said. Vextar couldn't even tell who had spoken. They made their position clear, he replied firmly. "They walked away without looking back. They've abandoned us." "We abandoned them first," Elder Zixara said quietly. As the meeting dragged on into the night, reports kept arriving. The hegemony fleets were advancing deeper into Council space. Pirates were attacking colonies that had never seen violence before. Power failures were spreading across dozens of worlds, but perhaps the most troubling report came from a deep space monitoring station near the galactic rim. The technicians there had detected strange signals coming from the darkness beyond known space. The signals were unlike anything they had seen before, following patterns that seemed almost alive. When asked what the signals might mean, the station chief had given a chilling response. "I don't know what's out there, but I wish the humans were here to help us figure it out." Late that night, Vextar stood alone on his office balcony looking out at the stars. Somewhere beyond the edge of the galaxy, human ships were sailing through the cosmic darkness. He wondered what they were thinking now. Were they angry? Sad? Did they regret leaving? Or were they planning something? The thought both terrified and strangely comforted him. Because as the Council crumbled around him, Vextar was beginning to understand a terrible truth. They hadn't feared human power because it was evil. They had feared it because they had never deserved it. The humans had offered them the stars, and they had chosen to remain prisoners of their own small minds. Now the galaxy was paying the price for their fear. 2 years had passed since humanity vanished beyond the galactic rim. Commander Yunji stood on the bridge of her ship, the Sanctuary, watching streams of refugee vessels fleeing toward the edge of known space. Her dark eyes reflected the flashing lights of dozens of different alien craft, all packed with families who had lost everything to the advancing hegemony forces. The hegemony had conquered 40% of what used to be council space. Their massive fleet swept through system after system, enslaving entire populations and stripping worlds of their resources. The council's military had proven completely unable to stop them. "Commander," her communications officer called out, "we have another distress signal. Aquarian colony ship, 300,000 civilians requesting immediate evacuation assistance." Yunji nodded. "Send coordinates for the nearest safe zone. Begin rescue operations." She had been leading these missions for 8 months now. Human ships would appear at the very edges of council space, evacuate refugees, and disappear again into the darkness beyond the rim. They never communicated with council forces. They never asked for payment or thanks. They simply saved lives and left. The humans spoke to no one from their old lives in the council, but they had never stopped caring about innocent people who needed help. Dr. Kim Sunho worked quietly in his hidden research station, monitoring communications across council space. His facility was built inside a dead asteroid, invisible to most sensors. For 2 years, he had been watching the galaxy tear itself apart. His screens showed the devastating progress of the hegemony's conquest. Entire civilizations were being wiped out or enslaved. The great trade networks that had connected thousands of worlds had collapsed completely. Many species were reverting to primitive conditions, cut off from the technology and resources they had depended on for centuries. But Kim had discovered something even more disturbing than the hegemony's expansion. His deep space sensors had been picking up strange signals from the void beyond the galaxy. The patterns were unlike anything in their databases, following mathematical sequences that seemed almost organic. He had run the signals through every analysis program he could find. The results made his blood run cold. The patterns matched theoretical models for something the humans had only heard about in ancient alien legends: the Devourers. According to the old stories, the Devourers were massive entities that consumed entire star systems, feeding on both matter and energy. They had supposedly swept through this galaxy millions of years ago, destroying countless civilizations before disappearing into the void between galaxies. Most scientists had dismissed the legends as mythology, but the signals Kim was detecting suggested that something massive and intelligent was moving through the darkness beyond the galactic rim, something that was heading toward inhabited space. He had tried to contact Human Command about his findings but received only automated responses, telling him to continue monitoring and report any changes. Elder Zixara moved slowly through the ruins of what had once been the Bellatrixian capital. The hegemony had bombed the city from orbit, leaving twisted metal and broken stone where millions of people had lived and worked. The ancient council member was leading a humanitarian mission to search for survivors. Her crystalline body glowed softly in the darkness, providing light for the rescue teams working around her. They had found only a few hundred people alive in the entire city. The rest had been killed or taken as slaves. "Elder," one of her assistants said quietly, "we've received word from the outer sectors. The Zentauran homeworld has fallen. General, Morgeth is dead." Zixara stopped walking. Morgeth had been a fool sometimes, but he had genuinely cared about protecting innocent lives. Now he was gone, along with billions of Zentaurans. "How long before the hegemony reaches the core worlds?" she asked. "Military analysts estimate 6 months, maybe less. 6 months until the hegemony reached Nexus Prime itself. 6 months until the Council would be completely destroyed." And still, High Counselor Vextar refused to even discuss contacting the humans. As if summoned by her thoughts, a communication from Nexus Prime crackled through her headset. It was Counselor Telvash, one of the few reasonable voices left in what remained of the government. "Elder Zixara," the Aquarian's voice was filled with urgency, "you need to return to the station. Immediately. We've discovered something that changes everything." Hours later, Zixara sat in an emergency council session. Only 37 members were present. The rest were either dead, captured, or defending their homeworlds against hegemony attacks. Telvash activated a holographic display that showed the deep space monitoring data Dr. Kim had been collecting. The strange signals pulsed across the screen in hypnotic patterns. "What am I looking at?" Vexitar demanded. "Evidence that we were fools," Telvash replied bluntly. "These signals match ancient descriptions of the Devourers. Something is coming from beyond the galaxy. Something that makes the hegemony look like children playing with toys." The chamber fell silent. Every species had legends about the Devourers, ancient stories of entities that consumed entire star systems. But they were just stories, weren't they? "The humans knew," Zixara said quietly. "That's why they were building up their fleets. That's why they were developing new weapons technologies. They weren't preparing to conquer us, they were preparing to defend us." Vextar's blue skin had turned almost white. "That's impossible. How could they have known?" "Because they went looking," Telvash answered. "While we were comfortable in our little corner of the galaxy, humans were exploring beyond the rim. They found evidence of the Devourer's return. They tried to prepare us without causing panic. The display showed more data, including intercepted human communications from before their departure. Scientists discussing deep void entities and extinction-level threats. Military commanders talking about defense preparations and evacuation protocols. They tried to warn us," another counselor whispered. "And we called them warmongers and tyrants," Zixara added. "We were so afraid of their strength that we never asked why they were becoming stronger." The truth hit the chamber like a physical blow. The humans hadn't been preparing to dominate the galaxy. They had been preparing to save it. And now they were gone. "Can we contact them?" someone asked desperately. Telvash shook his head. "We've tried for months. They've disappeared completely beyond the rim. For all we know, they might be dead. Or they might be the only thing standing between us and extinction," Zixara said. As the meeting continued, more reports arrived. The strange signals were getting stronger. The hegemony was advancing faster than ever, as if driven by some urgent purpose. And refugee ships continued streaming toward the galactic edge, where human vessels waited in the darkness to offer sanctuary. Humans were still out there, still protecting innocent lives, still preparing for something the Council was only beginning to understand. But would they return to help the people who had cast them out? Or would they let the galaxy face its doom alone? Deep in the void beyond, the rim, something vast and hungry stirred to life. The Devourers were coming home. 3 years had passed since humanity's departure. Fleet Admiral Cho Minho stood in the command center of New Terra, humanity's capital city built on a world beyond the galactic rim. Through the massive windows, he could see the construction, yards where thousands of ships were being built. These were not the same vessels the Council remembered. They were larger, stranger, equipped with weapons designed for an enemy unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. "Admiral," his aide reported, "the outer sensors have confirmed contact. The Devourers have entered the galaxy." Cho Minho nodded, grimly. He was 55 years old, a veteran of humanity's long journey beyond the rim. His gray beard and weathered face showed the stress of preparing for this moment. For 3 years, humanity had been building, planning, and waiting. "How many?" he asked. "Initial count suggests 47 entities. Each one is approximately the size of a moon. 47 Devourers, each one capable of consuming an entire star system." Cho Minho had studied the ancient records, the few pieces of evidence that previous civilizations had left behind before being consumed. The Devourers were not ships or machines. They were something far worse, living creatures that fed on both matter and energy, growing larger and stronger with each world they destroyed. Engineer Song Haiyan worked frantically in her laboratory, making final adjustments to the photon web generators. She was only 32, but she had become humanity's leading expert on anti-devourer technology. Her black hair was tied back in a messy bun, and her clothes were stained with grease and chemicals from weeks of non-stop work. The photon web was humanity's most important discovery during their time beyond the rim. By studying ancient battlefields, Where civilizations had made their last stands against the Devourers, human scientists had learned that the creatures could be disrupted by specific energy patterns. The web created a field that interfered with the Devourers' ability to consume matter and energy. "The generators are ready," she announced to her team, "but we'll only get one chance to test them in real combat." Her assistant, a young man named Park Ji-woo, looked up from his console. "Admiral Cho wants to know if we can protect an entire star system with the web." Song Hae-in shook her head. "Not yet. We can protect maybe a single planet or a small fleet. To cover a whole system, we'd need hundreds of generators working together. Then we better hope the Council fleets can buy us time to build more," Park said quietly. But they all knew the Council had no fleets left to speak of. The hegemony had destroyed most of them, and the survivors were scattered across the galaxy, trying desperately to protect what remained of their civilizations. The first contact between Council forces and the Devourers happened in the outer reaches, where the crystalline colonies had built their mining stations. The creatures emerged from the void like nightmares made real, massive, organic shapes that seemed to absorb light itself. They moved through space without any visible means of propulsion, flowing like liquid death toward inhabited worlds. The Council's remaining military ships tried to intercept them. Laser weapons, plasma cannons, and fusion missiles were fired at the approaching monsters. The attacks had no effect. The Devourers simply absorbed the energy, growing slightly larger with each hit. Within hours, 3 star systems had been completely consumed. Planets, moons, asteroid belts, even the stars themselves were drained of all matter and energy, leaving behind only empty void. Panic spread across the galaxy faster than the Devourers themselves. Refugee ships fled in all directions, but there was nowhere to run. The creatures were spreading out, consuming everything in their path. On Nexus Prime, the emergency council session was chaos. Representatives screamed at each other in dozens of languages. Some demanded immediate evacuation, others called for a final military stand. A few simply sat in stunned silence, unable to process the scale of the threat. Counselor Telvash tried to maintain order. "We need to contact the humans," he announced. "They're the only ones who might know how to fight these things." "The humans abandoned us," Vextar shouted. "Why would they help us now?" "Because that's what humans do," Elder Zixara said quietly. "They protect innocent lives, even when those lives belong to people who wronged them." As if responding to her words, every communication device in the chamber suddenly activated. The familiar blue and white insignia of the human fleet appeared on all the screens. But the ships behind the logo were unlike any vessels the council members had ever seen. They were sleek and dark, covered in strange geometric patterns that seemed to shift and move. Admiral Cho Minho's face appeared on the main screen. He looked older, harder than the humans the council remembered. His uniform was different too, black with silver trim, bearing symbols they didn't recognize. "People of the galaxy," he began, his voice carrying across countless worlds through every available frequency. "The Devourers have returned. 3 years ago we tried to warn you. We tried to prepare you. You chose to see us as the threat instead." The chamber was completely silent now. Even the most bitter human opponents found themselves leaning forward to listen. "We tried to tell you that something was coming from beyond the rim," Cho continued. "We tried to build defenses for all our worlds. You saw our preparations and decided we were planning to conquer you, so we left to prepare alone." Images flashed on the screen. Massive construction yards, weapons testing ranges, and fleets of the strange new ships. Humanity had been busy during their exile. "Now the real threat is here," the Admiral said. "The Devourers will consume everything in this galaxy unless we stop them. Not if we stop them. Unless. Because this enemy is unlike anything you have faced before." The transmission switched to combat footage. Human ships engaging one of the Devourers near the galactic rim. The creature was enormous, its surface rippling with organic textures that seemed to pulse with their own life. Council weapons would have been useless against it. But the human weapons were different. Beams of coherent light struck the creature, causing its surface to convulse and retreat. The photon web generators created geometric fields that made the monster recoil as if in pain. "We can hurt them," Admiral Cho said, as the footage played. "We can kill them, but not alone. And not if we have to fight the hegemony at the same time." The implications were clear. The hegemony was still advancing through council space, destroying what the Devourers hadn't reached yet. The galaxy was being consumed from two directions at once. "We will protect the innocent," Cho announced. "We will evacuate civilian populations. We will fight the Devourers wherever we find them. But we cannot save a galaxy that refuses to save itself." The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Hours later, reports began flooding in. Human ships had appeared throughout the galaxy, engaging both Devourer entities and hegemony fleets. The battles were unlike anything ever recorded. Humanity's new vessels moved with impossible speed and agility, their weapons carving through enemies that had seemed invincible. But there were too many fronts, too many threats. Even with their advanced technology, the humans couldn't be everywhere at once. The galaxy's greatest crisis had begun, and its only hope lay with the species they had driven away in fear. 4 years had passed since humanity's departure from council space. President Bae Hyunwoo stood in his office on New Terra, looking out at a city that had grown beyond all recognition. What had started as a simple colony had become the heart of a new civilization, one built in the shadow of an approaching apocalypse. The Devourer War had been raging for 8 months now. Humanity held the line at dozens of fronts, their advanced ships and photon web technology the only things keeping the ancient monsters from consuming everything. But the cost was enormous. Every day brought news of human casualties, of brave crews who had sacrificed themselves to save alien worlds that had once cast them out. "Mr. President," his aide announced, "the council delegation has arrived." Bae Hyunwoo nodded. He had been expecting this visit for months. The remnants of the Galactic Council had finally swallowed their pride enough to come begging for help. The delegation was small. Only 5 members remained of what had once been a 1,000-species alliance. They were led by Councillor Telvash, whose aquatic features showed the stress of recent losses. Elder Zixara glided beside him, her crystalline body dim with exhaustion. Even High Councillor Vextar was there, though he looked like a broken man. Ambassador Jang Mirai met them at the entrance to the presidential complex. She had been humanity's liaison to the council before their departure, and seeing these familiar faces brought back memories of better days. Her diplomatic training helped her maintain a neutral expression, but inside she felt a mix of anger and pity. The delegation was escorted to a conference room where President Bae waited with his senior staff. The contrast was striking. The human officials looked confident and determined, while the alien representatives seemed defeated and desperate. "Councillor Telvash," the president said formally, "Ambassador Jang Mirai tells me you've requested this meeting to discuss the current crisis." Telvash stepped forward, his gills fluttering with emotion. "President Bae, we come before you not as representatives of the council, but as survivors begging for mercy. Our civilizations are dying. Our worlds are being consumed. We were wrong about humanity." The words hung in the air like a confession at a funeral. Vextar, who had led the campaign against human expansion, looked at the floor and said nothing. "We understand," Elder Zixara added, her musical voice filled with sadness, "that we have no right to ask for your help. We cast you out when you tried to warn us. We called you warmongers when you were preparing to defend us. We feared your strength when we should have been grateful for your protection." President Bae listened in silence. Through the conference room windows, they could all see the massive shipyards where human vessels were being constructed around the clock. Millions of humans were working day and night to build the weapons needed to save a galaxy that had rejected them. "What exactly are you asking for?" Bae said finally. Ambassador Jang Mirai leaned forward. "They want us to save what's left of their worlds, Mr. President. They want us to die for people who drove us away." Her words were harsh but true. Human casualties in the war were already in the hundreds of thousands. Young people were dying every day to protect aliens who had once voted to restrict human freedom. Counselor Telvash's voice cracked as he spoke. We know we have no right to ask. We know you owe us nothing. But there are billions of innocent people, children who never voted against you, families who never wished you harm. If not for us, then for them. And what do you offer in return? President Bay asked. The delegation exchanged glances. They all knew they had nothing left to offer. Their fleets were destroyed, their economies collapsed, their governments in ruins. Complete surrender, Vextar said quietly, speaking for the first time. We formally dissolved the Galactic Council. We acknowledge human leadership in all military and political matters. We accept whatever terms you set for a new galactic government. It was an offer of total capitulation. The proud species that had once feared human domination were now begging to be dominated if it meant survival. President Bay was quiet for a long moment, considering their words. Finally, he stood and walked to the window overlooking the shipyards. Do you know what my people have been doing out here for 4 years? He asked. We've been preparing to save you. Even after you cast us out, even after you called us warmongers and tyrants, we kept working to defend the galaxy, because that's who we are. He turned back to face the delegation. We don't want to rule over you, we never did. We want to stand beside you as equals, facing threats too big for any one species to handle alone. Ambassador Jang Mirai pulled up, a holographic display showing humanity's terms for a new alliance. The new Galactic Republic, she announced. Equal representation for all species, with humanity serving as first among equals due to our current military capabilities. Shared technology programs, joint defense initiatives, and most importantly, no species ever again makes decisions based on fear of another. The terms were remarkably generous considering the circumstances. Humanity could have demanded tribute, territory, or subservience. Instead, they offered partnership. But the war was far from over. Even as they negotiated, reports arrived of new devourer attacks. The creatures had learned to work together, combining their efforts to overwhelm human defenses. Entire sectors were falling faster than they could be evacuated. The climactic battle came 6 months later at the galactic core, where the remaining devourers had gathered around the central black hole. They were using its immense gravitational field to grow stronger, feeding on the energy of collapsing matter. The combined fleet of humans and their new allies numbered over 10,000 ships. It was the largest space battle in recorded history, with vessels from dozens of species fighting side by side against an enemy that threatened all life in the galaxy. Admiral Cho Minho commanded the battle from his flagship, the Harmony, named in honor of the cooperation between species that had made victory possible. Engineer Song Haeon's photon web generators had been installed on ships throughout the fleet, creating a network of protective fields that could finally match the Devourer's power. The battle lasted 3 days. Ships were lost by the hundreds, brave crews sacrificing themselves to protect others. But slowly, painfully, the Devourers began to fall. The ancient monsters, which had seemed invincible, were finally meeting their match. When the last Devourer collapsed into the black hole, defeated by the combined will of a united galaxy, the surviving crews cheered across every frequency. Species that had been enemies for centuries embraced as brothers. The galaxy was saved, but the cost had been enormous. Millions of beings from dozens of species had died in the war. Entire star systems had been consumed. The scars would take generations to heal. 50 years later, the galaxy thrived under the new Galactic Republic. Trade flourished between worlds that had once been isolated. Technology advanced at unprecedented rates as species shared knowledge freely. The threat of the Devourers had taught everyone the value of cooperation over competition. On Nexus Prime, now renamed Unity Station, a memorial stood in the center of the Great Hall. It bore the names of all who had died in the war, regardless of species. At the top, inscribed in letters that caught the light from a dozen different suns, were simple words: to those who spoke, and to those who listened too late. President Bae Hyun-woo, now an old man, visited the memorial every year on the anniversary of the war's end. He would stand quietly for a few minutes, remembering friends who had died fighting for people who had once rejected them. Humanity had saved the galaxy not through conquest or domination, but through the simple act of never giving up on the idea that different species could live together in peace. They had walked away when betrayed but returned when needed. In the end, that was the most human thing of all.